Thank you so much to the Rudd family for sponsoring this wonderful event. To all of you who are here, I know so many of you and others I've met for the first time. It's always a real honor to be asked to do this, and I'll tell you just a little bit about what you feel as you're sitting there waiting to do this. It's like, why did they ask me to do this? That's the first thing. And then you're like, maybe what I'm saying is not really what I should be saying. Did I go to the bathroom enough times? Because I don't want to have to like run off the stage and go to the bathroom. There's all these thoughts that run through your head, and you would think that after all these years of doing this, you're calm and you're cool, but you're not. It's a big honor to be asked to do something like this, and it's also a big responsibility. So you kind of have all of these different emotions about what do you think and feel, and obviously you have some level of competence, right? Or they wouldn't have invited you. But there's all that anxiety and uncertainty about what it is that you're actually going to do. And I wanted to talk about things today that might be, for some people, not so comfortable, because some of us work in this field and have a passion, and I want to kind of preface what I'm saying by saying, in no way do I mean to be disrespectful to people who have done stuff in the past, and in no way do I mean to be denigrating to people who have done wonderful work, many of whom are my great colleagues and friends, but I think we need to look at things a little bit differently than we have been. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. Oh, can I borrow that dog? Can he come and sit up here with me? It's a little dog right there, if you haven't met him. And in calling this Truth or Consequences and Reform, I really wanted to think about those things that we needed to kind of speak some truth to, that we needed to understand what the consequences of not doing something at this point are. And I think we really needed to think about what are the things that we need to look at with respect to rethinking adoption in the 21st century. I didn't have this slide in here, and last night I was laying in bed and I'm like, no, I got to throw something in about data, right? As an academic, you have to say something about data, and I always go to these AFGARs, which is the only data we have nationally, right? The Adoption and Foster Care Annual Reporting System, and it's in its 24th version. Just to give you a snapshot, and probably lots of you know this, but just in case you don't. Currently, this is the number of kids that are in foster care on any given day when this was taken, which I always think is shocking. Almost 500,000 kids are in the foster care system. The interesting thing, and I didn't put it up there, is about 250,000 come in a year and about 250,000 go out. So it's kind of like an in and out. 117,794 children are waiting to be adopted in the United States. I always think also that's quite shocking. And last year, or the year that they did this, which was October of 2017, about 57,000 children were adopted from the public child welfare system. The one thing I was trying to dig up last night is that the State Department reported that they issued 5,372 visas to children who were adopted abroad in 2016. So just that stat. I couldn't find anything about other adoptions. I was trying to kind of fill in the gaps. And actually, to be really honest with you, as I was preparing for this, I kept looking for what's new in adoption? What's innovative in adoption? And you know what? I couldn't find too much, which was kind of shocking. So that's part of this whole kind of thought process. Just who are the folks who adopt children according to these data? Married couples still are the majority, 69%. Unmarried couples, 3. Single females, 25. And single males, 3. Interestingly, Penny Mazza, who used to do this, AFGARs, who many of us know, never put in single males under certain administrations because she was afraid that the administration would then ask who were these single males, and many of them are gay men. Not all of them, but many of them are. And she was afraid that if she identified them, then they could take them out. So even though these data are important data that every state submits to the feds, there's some political connection to them. They never want to change them either. Anytime you ask a question about changing the data sets, nobody ever wants to do that. But that's just kind of common in, I think, research in any case. The other thing that I think is important with respect at least to public adoption is 14% of these kids are adopted by non-relatives, and 52% are adopted by foster parents. Again, as a foster parent who did adopt their child, this is an important stat, but I think, we sometimes think of foster care and keep talking about it as if it's this temporary entity, and it was designed to be that way, and in some cases it is, but 52% of these folks make a permanent lifetime commitment to a young person, which is extraordinary. And that's a national stat. In many states, it's like 80%, 79%. It's a much higher number even than that number. Step-parent adoption is relatively small, and then other relative adoption, which is another category that we kind of, don't talk about. Believe it or not, in some states, they still don't have kinship on their books. Like for instance, somebody's here from the state of Virginia, right? In the state of Virginia, who's here from Virginia? Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe they changed this, but I remember them frequently, they had all kinds of rules about kinship adoption that made it almost impossible for kin to become a permanent connected parents for their grandchild usually, which I would find extraordinary. And we've changed a bit of those rules, but we still are kind of moving in that direction. So here's kind of the big questions, right? So what's new in adoption? Where's adoption going in the 21st century? What is innovative, exciting, and different? And like I said, I was kind of shocked when I kept trying to find innovative, exciting, and new and not finding anything. And, I don't want to be this negative Nelly, but I think that it's important to say that. I saw a lot of stuff about adoption, a lot of stuff from the New York Times, which was interesting, but like a lot of, stuff from Dave Thomas, which was a beautiful presentation about research they did recently. But, there was a lot that was missing there. And then the other day I got this email from the Children's Bureau, from the Children's Bureau Express, and it was like, what's new in adoption? I thought, oh, good. They've got some new stuff that now I'm going to be able to talk about when I go up there to Massachusetts. And you know what? It was documents from 2012 and 2013. And I thought, well, surely Ruth McCroy has written a lot more since then. Ruth, where are you? I know you have. But that's what they put out there. And I just thought, oh my gosh, really? Like, we don't have anything else to put out there? I mean, that was on their newest thing. So it kind of was a bit of a shock to me. So what I kind of walked away with, and what I want to talk a little bit about is, it seems to me that to some extent, adoption policies and practices have been kind of stagnant for a couple of decades or more. Have there been changes? Yeah, sure. Do we need to look at what else could change? Absolutely, and we should. And I think in the 10th year of this conference, the things that we need to look at are really, maybe stuff we've kind of tapped. I mean, Hal was, when he was saying what we're going to look at in this conference and the whole focus on, I need to talk about the theme, right? From safety to well-being. There's lots of things that have happened there, and I see well-being as everything that we're doing in adoption and post-adoption. But I mean, we need to really kind of make the move and make the leap. So here's what I think is new. I think we need to have a new conversation about adoption. My colleague April Dinwoody is very much somebody who's been working along on those lines, and actually I have to credit April for a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about next, because I think that those are ideas that kind of got surfaced in some of the work that she's done, but I think it's really important that we keep talking about how do you change that conversation, and how do we kind of stop, kind of say, okay, well, we've been talking about that now for like 35 years, right? Why can we move it to the next level, and how do we do that? So here are a couple of the questions that I thought is, how do we meaningfully, and the meaningfully you'll see is italicized, because I think we give a lot of BS to how we engage people. I love how we say, oh, we're engaging families. Yeah, we sent them a letter and they didn't respond, and that's the engagement. No, it's not. Because we had the meeting at 10:30 in the morning when they were at work. Right? So I mean, in foster care, that happens a lot. So I mean, meaningful engagement means we actually make it possible for people to participate. So how do we meaningfully engage all people affected by adoption? Adopted people, birth parents. When I came into this work, I've been doing it for 40-something years, but I'll tell you, until I went to Joyce's conference in Provincetown, I never met a real birth parent. And I remember being totally enamored by their stories. I mean, Leslie Pate McKinnon became a very close friend of mine because her story was a story that I never heard. I heard the myth that everybody else hears about a birth parents, right? And once I started to hear other things, it really changed my perspective and really made us understand, that even when we're doing clinical practice with people affected by adoption, the people who are most left out are birth parents. We'll say, oh, well, they don't want to be identified. Well, a lot of them do, and many of them have suffered for their entire lives about that experience. So, they come to us with all kinds of issues that really need to be addressed, and maybe it doesn't come out in the first session, but it comes out at some point that this is an issue that they're dealing with. So birth parents, other adopted parents certainly, siblings and other relatives, right? Any of you who are affected by adoption, and whenever we talk about that triad, I always say it's not a triad, it's like more like a constellation, right? Because I know in my own experience when I adopted kids, my mother, who was a wonderful person and a wonderful mother, would say the craziest things to me. Whenever one of my kids had a problem, she'd say, well, you know, you don't know where those kids come from. I'd say, Ma, like, why do you keep saying that? And she'd say, well, you know, you don't know where they come from. I said, like our family was so wonderful, you know? You know, your sister committed suicide and your brother fell in the fire in Scotland. I mean, you know, like that's not so wonderful either, you know. But there was these family members giving you their advice, right? Or my kids would go to a party with the family and they looked totally different from everybody else in the family. So, you know, they were treated well, but I know they walked away from those experiences feeling like, are we really part of this or not? You know, because they felt the difference, right? How do we make it possible for people who are most affected by adoption to have access to their lives, to their ethnicity, and to their history? I'll never forget a young man I worked with in Tucson, Arizona, who was adopted. And I always say the same thing to adopted folks, just because I do. I'll say, oh, so, you know, have you done a search? And they always, some of them say, yeah, absolutely, I know. Some will say, nah, I never thought about that. But this guy just said, Gary, you know, I've been thinking about it, but I've never done it. And, you know, one of the reasons I want to do it is because I don't even know what ethnicity I am. Now, this is before 23andMe and everything, right? 99.1% Irish. I know where I'm from, right? Literally. Right? The map is just Ireland, right? But this poor guy said, I was raised by Greek and Italian people. I don't think I'm either of those things. And I just thought to myself, as somebody who did know, even before 23andMe, gosh, that's terrible. Like, shouldn't he be able to have access to know where he comes from? You know, to at least know his ethnicity. It caught me off guard, and it's obviously stayed with me because that was many years ago. When are we going to start really addressing the issues of older youth and adoption? Right? I can't tell you how many times when I go out and do my little training on unpacking the know of adolescent permanency, which I've done for thousands of people, where some supervisor will say, yeah, but you know what, we got all these little kids and they really need to be adopted and these teenagers are gonna go out and live on their own. Like the worst thing that we ever invented was the concept of independent living. I don't know who developed that. Not that independent living training is bad. I wrote books about it and articles about it, and I ran an independent living residence for teenage boys in New York City for 20 years. But the idea that you live on your own and you don't have a family is a horrible thing to promote. And I think that we're not really doing that. And you know, babies are cute and attractive, and teenagers generally are still seen by many people as, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I have to say it, damaged goods. I don't want to do that. You know, that's too hard. You know, oh, that kid's got some drug problems. Oh, that kid, you know, they talk to their family and I don't want to have to deal with their families, you know. A lot of stuff. I adopted my daughter when she was 37 years old. She shamed me into adopting her because I was this big adoption advocate, right? And we gave a conference one time. She lived with me as a foster child from the time she was 16. And when she was about 35, she came to a conference like this with me and we gave a kind of parallel talk. And somebody said to her, I said, this is my foster daughter, Leslie, and blah, blah, blah. Why don't you tell them, Leslie, what our relationship is like? And she was talking, and somebody in the audience said, how come you've never been adopted, Leslie? And she said, because Gary Mallon never wanted to adopt me. I thought, oh my God, that's pretty embarrassing in front of 500 people, right? And I said to her, you know, did you just say that to embarrass me, or do you really mean that? She said, no, I've changed my mind. I want to be adopted. So we did an adult adoption when she was 37. So that's an interesting way of looking at it, right? And I know Sue, and lots of people, adoption doesn't come when you're 18 or 21. It comes when you're 30 and 40 and maybe even older than that, right? Where people make this lifetime commitment. We had a commitment, but she needed it to be legal. She said to me in the elevator when we came down from the finalization, you know, Gary, when you die, I can inherit all your money. I said, smart girl. I said, there's not gonna be nothing left, but good. You're right. And she corrects people whenever they say, you know, this is Gary's foster daughter. I'm Gary's adoptive daughter. She's very specific. She has developmental disability. She's now 50 years old, lives on her own, does very well. I was telling Joyce yesterday, she's an interesting character. She's had this life of growing up in foster care her whole life. She never lived in a family until she came to live with me and my crazy family. And she told me the other day when I was carrying on about money, I said to her, she lives in a supervised apartment program, and I said, Leslie, you know, I can't believe that you have no money for the next 2 weeks. You know, this is ridiculous. I don't understand why you have no money. You get paid on the first of the month, it's all gone, what's going on? And she said to me very calmly, you know, Gary, I live in the Heart Share program. It provides a safety net for me, and you really don't have to worry about that anymore. I said, you know, girl, you've gone to college too much, you know, because she had all of this knowledge now that she never used to have as a child. She's one of these people who took that GED test 17 times before she passed it, and she passed it. And now she got her associate's degree, and now she's getting her bachelor's degree, and I wouldn't be surprised if she gets a master's degree. I mean, Leslie's a very driven kind of person, but she was an older adolescent, and believe me, it's different to adopt an older adolescent, believe me. When are we going to have some meaningful conversations about race, class, and culture as they relate to adoption? You know, we've kind of, I always think of John Rabel as I talk about this, because John is one of these people who has a real passionate narrative about transracial adoption and what that means, and he says really uncomfortable things. I always bring him to this course I do in Louisiana, and I warn people, half of you are going to love him and half of you are going to hate him. And they do, because he's really provocative, he gets you thinking, but at the end of the class, when we evaluate the class, he's always the most highly rated person, because people who attend that class walk away with this wonderful knowledge about race and class and culture in different ways than they would have had John not been the person to come and talk to them. When are we going to start to address issues as they pertain to lesbian, gay, bi, and trans people who want to adopt? We did some of that with Obama. Some of it's now going back in the closet. I mean, these ridiculous laws that they're beginning to have around the country in different states that conservative politicians are promoting, not because they're the least bit interested in adoption, but because it wins votes later on. They're calling them, I have it down here someplace afterwards. I can't remember, but you know, they're calling them these conservative laws that are about religious rights, about like, if you don't agree with it, you shouldn't have to do this, which, you know, obviously we'd like to have people do the things that they feel comfortable doing and that they believe in, but in this case, it really becomes a discriminatory act, and that's what it is. I mean, it discriminates against people based on gender orientation or sexual orientation, and, you know, I think we're in an environment where we still need to really start battling that. In the Bush administration, when I worked at the National Research Center, we weren't allowed to say gay, lesbian, bi, or trans at all. I was on the first advisory board for Adopt US Kids. And I don't know, I was part of the National Research Center, that's why they invited me. And I kept saying, you're looking for parents? What about gay and lesbian people? Oh God, we can't talk about that. Why not? Oh, we're not allowed to talk about that. You know, it's against the administration, they don't really want to talk about that. Every workshop proposal I submitted that had gay or lesbian in the title was rejected. So people will say, oh, come on, really? Absolutely. I would submit the same proposal with a different name and it got accepted. If you eliminated gay or lesbian from it, it got accepted. If you didn't, it was rejected. I just want to tell you a funny story about Adopt Us Kids. I was on that group with a lot of really lovely people, but I remember one time they had this poster where they designed these posters for a recruitment, right? And they had, like, you know, the Latino mom with the Latina child. Oh, beautiful. Everybody loved that poster. Oh, they had the mom and the dad, African-American mom and African-American dad with an African-American child. Beautiful poster. And then they had the Latino guy with a boy. And so they're asking for feedback. And I said, oh, I love the gay Latino father. And they said, he is not gay. I said, yes, he is. And they said, no, he is not. And I said, no, he's a gay man and he adopted that child. That's a great poster. I think now we're going to, no, he is not gay. I said, you know how ridiculous you are. He's not even a real person. He's a model. We don't know if he's gay or he's not. Do you know what they did, though? Which really, I should have shut my big mouth. They eliminated the poster. Rather than, you know, kind of going on with it. Because I guess they thought, well, if Gary thought he was a gay guy, probably a lot of people are going to think that. So in any case, sometimes you need to be quiet. Not often, but sometimes. I think the other big piece of this is, when are we going to stop having federal and state folks control what gets spoken about and what doesn't? One of the reasons I can give this speech so freely is I have no grants with the federal government anymore. If I did, I couldn't, right? Because they say, oh, you know, you can't really say that. You can't say this, you can't say this, you can't say this. But I think they control the dialogue. And I think more and more we're beginning to get people, and not that they don't legally have the responsibility to do you know, the laws and whatever, but I think it's important. And the other thing is that, you know, and these are a group of folks that I love very much, but I always call them the adoption ladies. You know, they really control this group of people, what got talked about and what didn't, and what gets funded and what doesn't. And to be honest with you, they still do. And if they put it on the agenda and it got funded, it got funded. And if they didn't like the idea, it didn't get funded. And there was clear political and, kind of ideological things that kind of got funded. And that's the reality of what we all do. I mean, and people follow the dollar all the time, right? If you're in research, you're doing grant-funded stuff, you got to kind of follow some of that. But I think also we need to have people who continually say, you know what, there are other things we still need to talk about. And even when it's uncomfortable, and reflecting back on Adopt Us Kids, I kept saying that at meetings, not as provocative as the comments about the poster, but because no one else was saying that. And the reality also is because I was sitting in that room as a gay parent with a partner at home and 2 kids who were being so well cared for by us, I hope, him more than me probably, because I was always traveling. And it just so galled me that a bunch of other people were saying that this is not a good way for children to be raised. This is not a way that we think of family. So I think we really need to sometimes provoke a little bit of kind of conversation. When are we going to start addressing the fact that this country still has this storybook fairy tale view of adoption, right? I mean, sometimes you see things on TV or read about it, or just in conversation with people, and you think, my goodness, you still think that, right? And even the whole thing about secrecy and kind of whether or not you tell. I mean, it's a crazy thing. When I was in Indonesia, I was at a party one day, and I met this lady, and she said, I heard you do stuff on adoption. I said, yes, I have an adopted daughter. I said, oh, that's great. Does your adopted daughter know her birth family? Oh, God, no. I said, oh, why not? She said, she doesn't even know she's adopted. I said, oh my gosh, really? Of course, I immediately, you don't really want to do social work at the party, but sometimes you do. I just said, really, do you really think that's a good idea? And she said, well, no, she doesn't know. I said, how old is she? She's 35. Oh my God. I said, what do you think's going to happen when she finds out? And she said, I don't know, but you know what? She's always looking for baby pictures of herself and me being pregnant with her, and she never finds them. And I said, you think maybe she does know and she's just not telling you? And she said, I don't know, but I really have to think about this. She said, culturally, we don't do that. And she said, and I adopted her because she came from Chinese family. I have Chinese ancestry myself, so she looks like us. Old way of thinking, right? I've met people in the US who say that. It's not just in Indonesia. So I mean, this old kind of concept of kind of not understanding the realities of adoption. People really don't get foster care at all. They have no concept of what that's like, but I think those are things we need to change. So let's look at what we can start framing, okay, some of these issues. Adoption is not a one-time event, it's a lifetime journey. We all know that, you all know that, but I think that's the thing that we need to keep talking about, right? It's not just this event that happens at finalization and boom, it's over. And believe me, I know that. I have two children who are adopted, and Leslie, 3, and believe me, even at 50, there's still stuff. Right? Leslie will still say to me every once in a while, you know what, Gary, is there anything that I could ever do that would make you throw me out of this family? I think, really, you're still asking me that? Yeah, because that's what she feels. If I do one, and she'll say things like, suppose I killed your dogs. I said, I would be really pissed if you killed my dogs, but I wouldn't throw you out of the family, There's other things, and my other children who are now 29 and 26, all kinds of stuff. Right? It's a lifelong thing. One of my sons is now a father. The baby looks exactly like him. That's a wonderful thing for him. Nobody has a look like him. None of us look like him. Although people would say to you in the supermarket, this is your son, right? You look so much alike. And we'd laugh, like, yeah, really? Because they do that to people who are adopted and adopted parents, right? They look for this look. So I think, this idea of a lifetime journey, a transformational experience, the pre and post-test stuff, not post-test, that's too researchy, right? Pre and post-test training. No, it's not even test. Pre-training and post-permanency, that's what it is. This idea of, remember MAP training? How many people still do MAP training or participate in MAP training, right? Or PRIDE was the CWLA one. And now lots of states have developed their own, right? Do you know how much goes into those trainings and those poor people walk out like, what? They just basically, they're flooded with information. And of course, I'm one of those people saying, and you should put this in, and you should put this in. And it's like, really? We'd need to add another 20 days. I think it's also like, in some ways, you have no concept of how much children are going to change your life if you've never had children in your life. And then when you have them, you realize, my fantasy was I would come home from work and I would give them a bath and they would sit with me on the couch, and it would be beautiful. That maybe happened once. Never. It was like I came home from work, I was exhausted, they had a hard day in school, they were like fighting with each other, there was no laundry done, it was, and then, they went to bed at like midnight, and, and you went, and then they told you at 5 minutes before midnight, I have a school project tomorrow. And you're like, oh crap, really? Like, what do you need? I need poster board. Where am I gonna get poster board at 10 to 11, 12 at night? So that's the reality, but when you're doing pre-service training, people are like, oh yeah, okay. Or I've been a parent, I know how to deal with this, it's fine. People are kind of half listening, and even when it's great training. And I think, I'm exaggerating, of course, some people I think really get it, but where is the post-permanency services? I mean, I know you got some here in Massachusetts, but there's a lot of states, we don't have them. And New York, anybody here from New York? Okay. When I say that in New York, people are like, oh yeah, we have them. I'm like, really, where? Where are they? They might be in small little pockets, but again, as a parent of children who had difficulties, try to find an African-American male therapist who's cool to work with your 17-year-old child, who will not see anybody except the cool African-American, therapist. Travis wound up going to this Adirondack Wilderness Camp, and I interviewed the people who are running the camp. What do you know about adoption? Oh, we've had adopted kids here before. Great. What do you know about adoption? Oh yeah, we are okay with that. Okay, well, can you tell me a little bit about what you know? Nothing. So I said, well, gee, if nothing else, maybe you need to read Joyce's book, The Family of Adoption. Maybe you need to read 20 Things That Adopted Kids Wish Adopted Parents Knew. So they took my advice, and you know what they did? They told this 15-year-old child to read every chapter of 20 Things That Adopted Kids Wish Adopted Parents Knew, and to write in his little journal what he felt. So you know what it was? Chapter 1, the birth experience. This is not an issue for me. This is definitely an issue for my brother, though. Chapter 2, the home study process. I'm just making it up. This is not an issue for me. This is definitely an issue for my brother. Everyone was, except this one, healthcare and family medical history. Now, this is something I relate to because my birth family has bunions, and I'd like to know if I'm going to have bunions. It was so funny to read, but it was also really sad because I thought, that's all they did? I mean, I'm glad they did something, but that's certainly not kind of competent, right? It's just, superficial. Okay. Critical to all of this is having adoption competent therapists. We're going to be talking a lot about that at this conference, which is essential. Everybody talks about the need of post-permanency services. No one wants to pay for it. That's the real deal, right? They're expensive. People don't want to pay for that, or they think part of the fantasy is, well, after the finalization, everything's going to be fine. It's fine for a while, and then when adolescence comes, boom. My own children at 11, boom, completely different. Leslie, who has developmental disabilities, was very different as an adolescent than the boys were. But every kid's different. But there was all kinds of needs that we had. I remember people, like other adoptive parents saying, gosh, I had no idea it was going to be like this. I had no idea. And like, who do I go back to? The agency where I adopted them from? Half of them are closed. And there was no one to go back to. And then they would search for these competent therapists and post-permanency services, and they didn't always exist. The other thing is there's no post-permanency services in inter-country adoption, right? So these children who are adopted from other countries come to the US, and then, worst of worst, when they become teenagers, if the parents say, sorry, we can't deal with this anymore, they then go into the foster care system in the state that they live in, which they're totally unprepared for, and there's no real follow-up. So I mean, that's another whole issue of taking a look at, and I mean, I know in some cases, some countries are beginning to look more at that, but other ones have not. Families need support throughout, absolutely. I can't tell you as a parent how at times devastating it was to be a parent to two kids who were teenagers and were struggling with adoption stuff. It was heart-wrenching. I mean, I remember sometimes my younger son refused to go to school for months and months and months. And I remember I would work with people and they'd say, he wouldn't do that in my house. I'd say, yeah, well, everything you're thinking of doing, I did. I would drag him down the stairs, I would put him in the car, I'd lock the car, I'd go to school, I'd wait outside. I remember thinking, I'm gonna be in the newspaper, big child welfare expert, abuse his son, while trying to get him to go to school. And then they would have people from the school come to do interventions, and they would come downstairs and say, we can't get him to leave. I'd say, okay, well, that was a good intervention. And you're the expert. So, and then everybody would say, is he in therapy? Oh yeah, like that's some magical thing? I wish it was magic, right? I'll tell you what did work. This is the one thing I always tell people, is we did not give up. That's what worked. He cursed us out, he fought with us, he smoked weed, sold weed, did scratch feety in the subway. He was nasty, horrible, sweet sometimes. And then one day, it stopped. And he went to school. And he graduated from high school. And now he's an adult. And he's functioning. And he's doing well. I mean, the day he graduated from high school was like one of the biggest, happiest days of our lives. It's like, oh, good. At least you've gotten that mark. But I mean, I can't tell you why he changed. And I've asked him as an adult, why did you change? And he'll say, I don't know. I decided one day it just wasn't worth being so oppositional. Good. But it was that we stuck with him. His other brother, who's now 29, who had other kinds of issues, would scream at us, I remember, why don't you just send me back? I'd say, to where? He'd say, to the agency where they adopted me from. I said, they only deal with babies, where they wouldn't know what to do with you. You're like a nasty 18-year-old, And he would sometimes say to me, I'm afraid people are going to kidnap me. I would say, honey, if they kidnapped you, they would return you immediately. But, those kinds of things. He had totally different stuff. He had more depressed stuff, which was sad too, right? Stayed in his room, painted his room black, like dark, and everything was horrible and dreary and nothing was ever going to be good. Now I see pictures of him on Facebook with his girlfriend and he's smiling. I'm like, oh, good, you're happier. He's a rock star too, so that's his thing. So this lifelong support that families need is really critical and important. Professionals need credentials and education. I'm a professor in the School of Social Work. We never talk about adoption. Occasionally, I do in my class. Most people don't. And if you do, it's one little session, right? Oh yeah, there's adoption. There's all kinds of different in child welfare. I'll kind of include it. There's no courses on adoption. We've tried to introduce courses on adoption, and it's a very difficult, it's very specialized. I think in post, what do they call it? Continuing education, we maybe have an opportunity to do more of that. But while people are working on an MSW or other degrees, there's so much else in the content, you just don't get to that. But it usually comes afterwards. There's a need for cultural shifts, right? Adoption is not a business transaction, although frequently it's looked at as that. It's a human transaction, right? Where's the humanity in adoption, right? I'm always aware, and when I work with students talking to them about issues, this is about real people whose lives we're affecting every single day. So, when you hear people saying, well, it just didn't work out and they returned that child, I always say, what do you think the consequence of that is? In foster care, multiple placements is such a horrible thing. I've worked with kids in Mississippi, Louisiana, 60 placements. Can you imagine that? And then they'll say something like, and she's very disturbed. No kidding. Who wouldn't be? 60 placements. And she's not adoptable. Couldn't go there. Again, because we really haven't looked at it in a different way, because she's now a teenager, because the other thing is, I've heard kids say this to me, because we've promised them this make-believe, permanent, loving family 10 times. And it never worked. And so the kids say, forget it, I don't want your stupid, loving family, right? You promised me that over and over again, and you know what? It's bullshit. It doesn't exist for me. So I'll just go out and do my own thing. And they do, unless they find somebody who they connect to. Maris Blechner is a wonderful colleague of ours and is somebody who says, you don't adopt a teenager, they adopt you. So like this connection, and that's why older adolescent adoption is so important in the sense that we don't do it the same way we do it for younger children, because really it's about the child making the decision that you're worthy to be my parent. A whole different process, right? So what about transparency, openness, equality? Important concepts. Transparency, sometimes we have it in adoption, sometimes we don't. There's a lot of deception, has been historically. We're getting a little better about it. I'm not just talking about open adoption versus closed adoption, but just the whole way in which we do our business, and as well around transparency and equality, who gets to adopt. I think it's really important that we really start taking a very strong stand about restoring adopted people's unrestricted access to their own original birth certificates. That should be one of the things that we as a field are really pushing. Every year in Louisiana, it goes to the legislature and it gets knocked down for lots of personal reasons. First of all, they used to say it was the Archdiocese of New Orleans that would knock it down. And then the Archdiocese of New Orleans decided it wasn't such a bad idea and started to support it, and it still got knocked down. Because there were people in the legislature who were adoptive parents who had a personal thing about, I don't really think that's a good idea. Including one of our US state senators who came from Louisiana, who was, an adopted parent who did not think it was a very good idea that people who were adopted have access to their birth records. So we all need to really, Oregon has done it and many other states have followed suit, but I think that we really need to make that an agenda item in the sense of having people have access to information about their identity that everybody else has been withholding from them. I think, and this one was for you, Joyce, we need to smash secrecy and dishonesty, right? Secrecy in adoption is a big deal, right? And I always think about our friend Tom, who talks about, he didn't know he was adopted until he was 12. And then they gave him the wrong information about where he was born. So he couldn't find his information. It was all this deception. And again, we always think sometimes, we're not doing that anymore, right? We don't do that anymore. It's like when people say to me, racism, we've conquered that in this country, right? Oh yeah, please, not at all. Or, gay issues, that's not an issue anymore, right? We're all cool with that, right? No. This is another one of those deals. We still have all this secrecy and a lot of deception, and I think some of it is about information, and I think that it's really time to kind of look at that in a different way. Potential parents need to be evaluated based on their qualifications as parents, not their sexual orientation. And here's the one I was looking for before. We need to refuse to buy into this conscience bill nonsense. I know, when you're in a state and then this gets passed, what do, right? You can't not adhere to the law. But at the same time, I think some of these things that are happening around the country, which are called conscience bills, are really discriminatory practices. And I think that we really need to say they're discriminatory practices. It has nothing to do with conscience. You don't have to do this, but you shouldn't exclude others from doing this because you have an issue with it. Money and privilege distort adoption. Money is a big part of adoption, right? People always start there with me when they talk about adoption. How much does it cost? It's like, well, it depends, right? But what a place to start, right? They don't start with what does it feel like when you're a parent of a child who you've adopted. It's like, how much does it cost? Yeah, it costs, in some cases, a lot of money, right? And I think one of the worst things is this last point. I remember in agency, I saw this menu that was about race, ethnic background, and needs of a kid. It was like a menu. If you want this kind of kid, here's how much it costs. If you want this skin color, this is how much it costs. You want this hair type, this is how, I'm not talking about 50 years ago. And in some places, they would hand this out to you as you were adopting. Right? Here, pick from our menu. What a horrible thing, right? So many parallels also to slavery, right? And the whole concept of, I really avoid that term, putting a kid up for adoption, right? It means standing up on a box on the stage so everybody can look at you, right? This whole process, and I'm probably getting in trouble for saying this, but I hate that concept of, where we have these events where we kind of parade adopted kids around. And people kind of say, oh, she's cute. The little one with the pink dress, I like her. It's like, oh. I know, like even Wednesday's Child and things like this, we have to do things so we can recruit meaningful and important, loving families. But I think some of those things that we do, we really need to think about. The gotcha stuff, the goodbye parties. Some of this is like antiquated, but I still hear it, right? Mixing the teenagers in with the Barney that's dancing around. They don't want to be near Barney. They don't even want a name tag. We were trying to promote this concept of digital stories where you let teenagers tell their own stories through digital media instead of like the website where they just flash a picture. They're expensive to make. It didn't really go. We did some of them, but at least the kid has some control over what they think they want people to know about themselves. One of the things that when we do the Unpacking the Know of Adolescent Permanency is, and Kim Stevens gave this to me, this whole concept of letting the young person interview the potential adopted person. Like, have you ever had kids in your home before? If so, what happened to them? What's the thing that would make you lose your mind and say, I'm gone? What kind of discipline do you use in your home? Where they interview the parent. I thought that's a great idea, especially for teenagers, because then they have some insight into what's happening there, right? And foster care incentivization is a really important piece of this. We want young people, we want children from foster care, all those 117,000 of them to be adopted. There are many different ways of adoption. I'm never one of those people who think this way's better and that way isn't. Although, as an adopted parent, people will say to me sometimes, how come you adopted your kid from a private agency and not from the public foster care system? And sometimes I'm nice and I tell them, well, children need a lot of home. And sometimes I say, because it's none of your damn business, right? Because I made that decision. And, it's like, when you, I think all ways of adopting children are important, and we really need to honor them and look at them as meaningful and important. Of course, because I think I've worked in the foster care system so long, I love when people adopt from foster care, but there are many different ways and many different reasons that people adopt children as well, and young people, and adults maybe. Adoption varies from state to state, so there's no real great uniformity. National standards, Child Welfare League of America has standards. We've played around with this idea of rigorous home study process, like a uniform home study process, options counseling, post-adoption support, professional training. Let me say something about the home study piece, though. That there are some states where when you need to transfer a kid from like New York to New Jersey, you need an interstate compact, right? Well, I'm exaggerating. The New Jersey people will not accept the home study from New York because they don't think it's rigorous or adequate enough, and therefore that slows down that kid from going like right across the border to somebody who's already waiting for them, right? That's a real barrier. I mean, the idea of this uniform home study process was if we all had a uniform system that we all agreed was, was adequate, that might change things. Now, there's lots of discussion about that, but I do think we need to start looking at that. I mean, the interstate compact system, you know what it is you have 50 states, right, and a bunch of territories. There's one person, I'm not exaggerating, one person who is the interstate compact person with a pile this high of reports to read, and if he or she gets to them, they get them to them. And if they don't, it could take months and months and months before a young person is reviewed and might be all set, all ready, and yet that kid sits there waiting because that one person is overwhelmed with the responsibility. So, maybe we need to have more interstate compact readers or people that we can hire as well. Consistent and standardized post-permanency. I always say post-permanency because I'm conscious of the fact that sometimes young people are in foster care for longer periods of time and we don't, we think of permanency as a panacea, right? As soon as you achieve permanency, everything's great. And the reality is once you've achieved permanency, there's a lot more to do. So I try to just expand it a little bit from adoption, post-adoption to post-permanency. The panacea of adoption is another kind of fantasy that we sometimes hold. Services need to be funded and accessible. I live in New York City. I'm a native New Yorker. I can't tell you how hard it was to find people who could work with my family and my kids at times. And we had money, right? And that's a big problem too. Our son was in bad shape and needed to go to this school. You know how much the school was in New York City? I'm talking about like junior high school. $39,000 a year. Can you imagine that? That's like, going to Columbia, right? $39,000 a year to go there that you had to pay for him to go there. Well, I had a friend who said, hey, my daughter had a problem like that too, and you know what? We sued the city of New York and the Board of Education on her behalf, and now they pay for it. I'm like, really? You can do that? Yeah, if you hire an attorney for $3,000 that will do that for you, yeah, you can do that. But imagine, I could do that, but imagine the person who doesn't have $100 to do that. Right? Know where their kid goes? To what we used to call a size 7 classroom, a locked classroom, right? Or they drop out of school. Right? So, I mean, the inequality as it relates to finances is a huge issue, too. And just knowing about that, if my friend had not told me that, I wouldn't have known that. I'm not an educator in that respect, but that was a gift. I mean, he went to that school for the next 4 years and graduated. Great. And saved, $39,000 every single year when we had to pay that, which we did for the first 2 years. right? So this idea of services that are accessible and identifiable, and I know in one of the studies, I think that a NACAC study that I recently reviewed, that was one of the biggest things. Can you find services? Are they accessible? Do you know who, and are they competent? Or do they just say, oh no, we know about adoption, no problem. One of my sons had a therapist for I don't know how many years. She refused to see the family. She only saw him. Ridiculous. I kept saying that. This is ridiculous. I went to see her one time and said, this is a ridiculous thing that you will not see us. Well, you know, he's an adolescent and he needs to trust me, and yeah, great, but it's a family system. Don't you think we should, at some point, not every week, have some kind of no, you know, a psychiatrist, and she was somebody who, you know, was not trained as a competent practitioner in adoption issues, but, you know, that's the way it went. It wasn't very effective therapy. He went for many years. Rehoming is probably the worst thing that can come from not having uniform standards, not understanding where things are. We see these examples that pop up in the news all the time, which are pretty horrifying, of people who make these decisions to just, you know, I can't care for him, so maybe I'm going to send him over there to sue. If I sent them to sue, it'd be fine. But, you know, it's informal. There's no supervision. There's no nothing. And then there's no transition for that young person to say, here's why, right? Not that the constant kind of multiple placements is ever good, but I mean, there are ways of making it better when it has to be, which is a transition, than when, you know, it's just, you know, pack your bag and go. Or, you know, you come home from school one day and, you know, you got a black plastic bag on the front porch with all your belongings in it, or the social worker picks you up in the car and says, this is not working out, and, you know, you're going to another permanent place. Horrible situation for young people. And we do that over and over again. Just kind of an overall lack of understanding about adoption. Having a meaningful voice honored. We're having a panel after this of wonderful people that April has coordinated and I've had the privilege to work with as well, to talk about some of these issues and to hear in real people's voices some of these things that I've been talking about. I think the stigmatizing depictions of adoption that we see sometimes foster care in the media need to be challenged. I know some people have, you know, write letters to the editors. Some people really, I think also we have to honor when it's good. There's a couple times when there was a great movie a couple years ago called Mother and Child that I remember calling Joyce afterwards and saying, did you see anything in that movie that was wrong? And she said, no, it was a great film. It was, but that's rare. Most times you watch a film and say, ugh, that's wrong, that's bad, that's a bad image, that's a horrible image. My partner, who is not a social worker, will say to me, do social workers really do that? You know, when we'll see something, say, no. Bad social workers might, or, you know, therapists who are not well trained might do that, but that's not really what happens. But people who watch this understand it as well. I guess that is really what happens with these folks, right? Professionals and families obviously need to be better educated about the unique issues of adoption and foster care. These are ongoing discussions and ongoing training and ongoing experiences. I want to end with a few hopeful things. What works? Who's here from Treehouse? Good. That is the most interesting, unique, and wonderful program that I have seen in about 40 years. And I know you were here, and I wanted to make sure I said that, not because you were here. I would say it even if you weren't here. Hal and Ruth invited me to go up there one day. I had just come back, I think, from Indonesia. I was driving like with toothpicks in my eyeballs because I was exhausted, but I had to go. It was such a wonderful experience, and if you do not know about their program, you need to check it out. It was so incredible. And I keep thinking, all right, why aren't we funding more programs like that, right? It's this integrative, intergenerational, wonderful model. I know it's expensive. I know it costs money, but so do lots of other BS programs that we fund, right? I mean, millions of dollars. I was looking at the Federal Registry last night and seeing the millions of dollars we're spending on stuff. Some of them are great, but I mean, really? I mean, my NRC was funded $6 million a year, you know, for 6 years or 5 years. It's a lot of money. But, you know, I think we need to kind of look at things like Treehouse Foundation, Treehouse Community. And I'd love to come again, because I was so impressed when I went there about what I saw and what I heard and meeting the people that were there. I talked about it for a long time, and Hal, I know, wrote an article that was in the Child Welfare Journal, which I made sure was the first article, because I thought I really wanted to make sure that people saw that and read that and understood that. Continuous education of adoption competent professionals. I'm a believer. I love, the fact that we're doing things now online and we're doing things. I think we need to keep doing things live too. I'm one of these people. Maybe I'm real. I mean, as I get older and older, I realize, be quiet, you're getting old. But there are things that I think work, and I think one of them is in-person work. Clinical case consultation works. I mean, I do Skype stuff when I can't go, but I think the in-person stuff has a quality that I don't want to lose. I don't want to just move to a model where it's all, online or all Skype-driven or whatever platforms we're using. But I think we need to do continuous training in these areas. A greater openness and less secrecy. How do we get there? How do we keep bashing some of these concepts that people keep promoting? And I think also we have to keep asking people, like, what is your interest in adoption? Like, why are you interested, right? Because I think sometimes there are people I meet and I think, I have no idea why they're interested in this. And it doesn't even seem like they should be. So, not to get into their business, but I do want to know kind of like what's your interest and involvement. 23andMe and Ancestry.com and Facebook and all these platforms. I was joking, 99.1% Irish. Yeah, I know where I come from. I kind of hoped I was something else, but I'm not. I really did. I was shocked. My partner's like, Iberian Peninsula, Ashkenazi Jew, Asian, Italy, Italian. I'm like 99.1% Irish. Wow. You are what you are. But I think for people who really don't know, what a wonderful gift to say, wow, at least I have some insight into ethnically where I might come from. And then they do all this matching where if other people who are cousins or aunts or uncles or brothers or sisters or mothers or fathers, I've seen this, where you can be connected to them too if you choose to. Right? So it's opened a whole new world. Facebook was doing that too. When I taught here in Massachusetts, I taught something about permanency, and there was one young woman in the class who told me that she was friends on Facebook with all her birth family, but they didn't know who she was. I thought, wow. And I said to her, do you think you're ever gonna, come out to them? And she said, I don't know, maybe. She said, but it kind of makes me feel better just to follow them like that. And I thought, well, great. Good thing that you have that. But if you use Facebook, how many people here use Facebook? Oh gosh. And you need to go on that new thing where it tells you all the things they know about you. It's like, oh wow, that's way more than I wanted you to know. But, it has problems, but it's still a wonderful platform, I think. I'm friends with about 50 of my young people from Green Chimneys that I worked with for 20 years. And they're all in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. I always ask them, how old are you? 50. Wow, you're old. I mean, I think of them as a teenager. I keep thinking that they're 16 or 17, but they're like 50. And it's kind of shocking, but it's wonderful to kind of follow up with them. And I think that's a wonderful platform for people to kind of do it in their own way. Maybe they don't know who you are, but at some point you have the option of talking to them or meeting them or disclosing your identity to them if you choose to. I think we need to have more committed professionals who really feel adoption, right? It's so nice to see all these posters and kind of people who are interested in this, who are young people who are in the field. Child welfare has always been this field where a lot of people would talk about it, even in social work schools, as entry-level job, which means you stay for a couple of years, you get some supervision, you leave. I hate when they say that. It's like it can be a lifetime commitment and a career choice if you choose to. But if we keep promoting it as a temporary job, then that's what you get. People who think of it as a temporary job. Some people may enter then and stay for their whole career, but I think we need people who really kind of feel what we're talking about, not just have this professional piece of it, but really kind of get it and understand it. I think we need a different kind of research ground in practice and lived experiences of people affected by adoption. And I wrote that last night, and then I looked at all these today, and I was like, oh God, I shouldn't have said that, because clearly people who have done these wonderful posters, which I would urge you to look at, are doing some real work with real people who have lived that experience. So I think we need to keep doing that. And remember, I'm the editor of Child Welfare, so if you're looking to get your article published, I'm available. It's a peer-reviewed journal, but still, I think it's important that we keep publishing good stuff about the field and important information about the field. I particularly enjoy when I see something that's really kind of connected to people who are affected by adoption in intimate ways. But there's lots of ways of doing research. I've learned to honor that. I mean, we were talking last night about, academia is, people publish certain things and not others. Things are honored and not others. Are there other ways of really getting the message out there through media? I was talking about digital stories. We did this wonderful stuff where young people told their stories about their adoption experience, and it was in their own words. They filmed their own story, and they were beautifully done. But they cost money, and they're difficult, and it's not something you can get published, but you can put it on a website. Nowadays, there's so many things online, and so many things. I mean, even when I teach and you use Blackboard, students can watch things in ways they never could before. So I think there's lots of ways of teaching people about that. These were just two thoughts that came up when I was kind of looking around for things that talked about change, just kind of in summarizing where we're at. I liked them both. I thought they were good. One is by Socrates and one was by unknown. I just deleted who they were by because I thought that was a bit odd. Socrates, unknown. You can guess who is who. The secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting old, but on building new. And your desire to change must be greater than your desire to stay the same. And I think that that's kind of where we need to move to, right? Our desire to change, to kind of continually improve what we're doing, to kind of bash some of that secrecy, to kind of not keep allowing people who have set the agenda by themselves to set the agenda alone, to have voices of people emerge. Those are all important things. And if you don't like Socrates or unknown, maybe you'll like St. Francis. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in the world so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. I always think that it's important that we're hopeful that there are things that can be done, that we're all part of making that change, that you all being here today and Hal and the Rudds and people who have really contributed to making this an important event for the last 10 years and hopefully beyond that. And those of you who've spent your entire careers and lives affected by adoption, know that what we're doing is really meaningful and important work and really can make a change. So thank you very much.